still section 5.1, so please just continue where you left off yesterday. Simplifying. We are simplifying trig functions. Please have your identities out in front of you because you are going to need them. Simplifying trig functions. And all today is going to be our 3 examples. Some of them harder than others, so be prepared. First example is this. Let's say that you have the sine of x times the cosine squared of x minus the sine of x. And your job is to simplify this, make it look a little bit nicer than it does right now. So we have to think about all the math that you guys have learned over the years and try to use it when you can. So let's say, for example, that you have 3x squared minus 3. What would you do to try to factor this? You take out a 3. Do you see how these two things have a 3 in common? So I would take it out. If I take out a 3, what am I left with? X squared minus 1. What do you recognize about these two things?
Yes.
They both have a sign. Yeah? So I'm going to take a sign out. So I'm going to be left with the sine of x times cosine squared of x. Then what? Minus 1. Very nice. Now, does this kind of look familiar to you? It almost looks like, very nice, remember this? It almost looks like you have the sine squared of x plus the cosine squared of x is equal to 1. If I were to subtract cosine squared of x from each side, I would have the sine squared of x is equal to 1 minus the cosine squared of x. Would you agree? We've already talked about this. This should be boxed or circled or something in your notes. But this is not what that says. That says cosine squared of x minus 1 rather than 1 minus the cosine squared of x. Are you with me? But if we could change that to make it look like this, then we'd be in pretty good shoes. So what I would like to see you guys do here is change everything in this thing so that it's exactly the opposite of what it is right now. If I do that to everything, that's a legal move. I can't just do it to one thing, though, and not the others. I have to do it to everything. So I'm going to change this sign so that it is negative. I am going to change this cosine so it is negative. And I'm going to change the minus 1 so it is a positive 1. Now, do you recognize that you could just switch these two? So we have negative sine of x times 1 minus the cosine squared of x. And all I did was just wrote these two in a different order. The 1 is still positive, the cosine is still negative. Now this looks nicer. What is this? So we have negative sine of x times, what is this again? Sine squared of x.
Oh.
Is it over? Oh, because it equals sine.
Oh. 1 minus so cosine squared of x is equal to the sine squared of x. So we have the sine of x times the sine squared of x. What is that?
Yes.
It's sine cubed. Yeah, because this is like a sine to the first power. It is negative because we're multiplying a negative times a positive, giving me negative sine cubed of x. And that's the first time you guys have ever seen anything other than squared. And that is your answer. This is simplified. So, you guys, I know these are they're not easy. I know that you're going to try something and it's not going to work, and then you're going to try something else and not going to work, and that's just part of being good at these things. So it's going to take some practice. Every problem's a little bit different, so some of you have to be creative, and obviously you're gonna need some guidance along the way too. All right, let's try this one. Sine of theta, another example. Kendra, can you pull the lines down, please? If you don't want to write theta, obviously just write x, probably a little bit quicker. Plus the cotangent of theta times the cosine of theta. And we just need to clean this up. We need to make it look a little bit nicer than it does right now. So I am going to try changing, this looks pretty simple right now, sine of theta, but this does not. I know that I could make this look a little bit nicer. What does cotangent mean? Cosine over sine. Tangent is sine over cosine. Cotangent is cosine over sine. So I'm going to rewrite this, changing things around a little bit. So I have the sine of theta plus, what is cotangent again?
Cosine over sine.
Yeah, and this is when knowing your identities well comes in handy. So we have the cosine of theta over the sine of theta, and we are still going to multiply this by the cosine of theta. We cannot just cancel our signs out right now. That's what Michelle's asking. Why can we not cancel our signs out? Yeah, because we're adding. That plus sign in there screws it up. So, let's start a new line. Sine of theta
Doesn't that mean 10?
plus, we have cosine of theta. Remember this cosine of theta right here really means the cosine of theta over 1. And I'm multiplying a fraction by a fraction.
Does that mean COT?
So we have cosine of theta times the cosine of theta. What is cosine times cosine?
Cosine squared.
Cosine squared. So we have cosine squared of theta over sine of theta times 1 is sine of theta. And this isn't looking much nicer, is it? So this might be a point where you go, okay, I'm not headed in the right direction, maybe I should try something else. But what we really have here is the sine of theta over 1. We have a fraction plus a fraction. And you guys need to get good at this, adding fractions together. Do you remember the first step? Cross multiply, yes, very good. So I'm going to multiply this way. Sine of theta times the sine of theta is the sine squared of theta. And then you multiply this way. So we have 1 times the cosine squared of theta. Then do you remember what to do?
The one where you have 1 times sine, don't you?
Yeah, very good. You have to multiply this way, and then you multiply the denominators. What is 1 times the sine of theta? Sine of theta. That's our new denominator, is these two things multiplied. The top should look very familiar to you. It's 1. It's an identity, yeah. What is sine squared plus cosine squared? 1.
Then 1 over sine.
1. Very nice.
CS.
1 over the sine of theta. What is 1 over the sine of theta? So all of this, really, it's kind of like a big puzzle. You just got to figure out how it's going to work. Let's try one more. And then I will give you your assignment again, which is another relatively short assignment.
Yeah, because they're hard.
All right. The secant of theta minus the tangent of theta times the cosecant of theta plus 1. Are you ready? This is going to be a ton of fun, you guys. Wait, what are we going to do to this?
Foil it.
Yes, we're going to FOIL that. You see 2 things times 2 things. So we're going to FOIL it. First, outside, inside, last. So secant of theta times the cosecant of theta. I'm just going to write it down. Secant of theta, cosecant of theta. That was first term times first term. Now we're going to do outside terms, which is secant of theta times
Negative
1. Then we're going to multiply the inside terms, which are these two. Don't forget the negative. So we have negative tangent of theta times the cosecant of theta.
negative tangent.
And we have negative tangent times 1, which is negative tangent of theta. Oh man, doesn't this look great? Looks worse than it started, right? All right, now what we're going to do is try to clean this up a little bit. Secant and cosecant, what does secant mean?
1 over cosine.
For cosine. So we have 1 over the cosine of theta times, what about cosecant?
1 over sine of theta.
Sine plus
1 over cosine.
1 over cosine again, minus, what does tangent mean?
Sine over cosine.
I'm changing all, now this tangent really means 1 over cotangent, but I'm changing all of this stuff so it's in terms of cosines and sines. So let's write tangent so that it's in terms of sines and cosines too. So tangent is sine of theta over the cosine of theta. Cosecant is 1 over the sine of theta, and as soon as I write this, or as soon as you write this, you should recognize that something's going to happen here. Very good. Minus, and then what is tangent? Sine of theta over the cosine of theta. Let's try to clean it up now. You've already told me those cancel out. So what I really have going on here is, this is a fraction times a fraction. So I'm going to multiply it. 1 times 1 is 1. Cosine times sine is cosine sine. Plus,
Those cancel out.
oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Do you see that, you guys? These have canceled out. So we have 1 over cosine left. You see that?
Yeah.
I'll circle this. But we have a plus 1 over cosine minus 1 over cosine. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I'm going to completely cancel those out. They have disappeared. So this, I went to write it and I shouldn't have.
But
She's very smart.
Go ahead, what were you going to say?
is it because it's just negative and it's not minus?
This is plus a fraction minus the same fraction. So if I had plus a half minus a half, they would cancel out. And the sign values canceled out, leaving me with, because these, remember these two things right here were going to be multiplied. So I was going to have, after those canceled out, all I had left was a 1 on top, a cosine on the bottom. And I already have a 1 over cosine here. So I have a plus cosine, 1 over cosine here, minus 1 over cosine here. So they cancel out. Minus what's left, the sine of theta over the cosine of theta. Now, it would be really nice right now if the denominators were the same. Are they the same? No, of course not. So what we have to do instead is we have to add them together using our cross multiply thing again. So I'm going to carry on over here. I'm sorry, what? Subtract them together. Subtract them. That's what I meant. I'm sorry. Yeah, subtract because of the minus sign. Yeah. So we're going to multiply this way. 1 times the cosine of theta. What is 1 times the cosine of theta? Cosine of theta. And then we have to multiply this way. Cosine of theta, sine of theta times sine of theta is what? Cosine of theta, sine squared of theta. What do I put in the middle? A minus. Put a minus here. All over What am I gonna do here? Yeah, cosine squared